live visuals that we're getting you of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Brisbane. These are visuals of the opening ceremony of the G-20 summit. Prime Minister Modi being welcomed by Tony Abbot to the summit. Lots on the agenda today. Prime Minister Modi, in fact, had an early start on day 2 of his Australia visit. He started with an informal meeting with the BRICS leaders, followed by a bilateral with the French president. TV Today's managing editor Rahul Kawal is with us live from Brisbane. Rahul, take us through what's happening on the ground there.
It's been a very, very hectic day for the Prime Minister. He's just finished his meeting with François Hollande, the French president, after which a quick meeting with Tony Abbot, whom he will be spending time with separately as well. And on the main agenda with Australia is to try and improve economic ties, to try and use the resources that Australia has, to try and get them into India, and India being hugely energy deficit, to try and find ways of using Australian mineral resources, the uranium present over here, to try and improve bilateral ties. Now, one of the key perspectives, both in Australia and in India, is that here is a relationship where there isn't much confrontation, unlike, say, a relationship with China, Pakistan, or even the United States, which has had its ups and downs, areas of controversy, areas of soreness. With Australia, the relationship is such that there isn't any area of confrontation. It's about trying this several areas of commonality, including cricket, democracy, left field drive. Now, the idea is to try and use the commonality to take the relationship to the next level, and that is what the Prime Minister is attempting to do. The buzz here in the G20 Convention Centre is that the Prime Minister has taken up very forcefully the entire agenda of black money by putting it front and center in the morning BRICS meeting, saying that that is his commitment. So far, the Prime Minister was being criticized for not really walking the talk on black money and not doing anything about it since the time his government came into power. Either responding to that criticism or of his own volition, the Prime Minister has now, in a big way, taken up the issue of black money, and this is giving a fillip to the entire process of trying to build a consensus around a global convention against tax evaders, where information will be freely shared between tax authorities about specific dubious bank accounts, regardless of where they are in the world. It will not need to be a bilateral agreement, it will be a global convention. That's what the Prime Minister is pushing for. That agreement had been in the works for a while, but that agreement wasn't moving with any conviction or any speed. The Prime Minister's intervention in Brisbane is expected to at least speed that process up, and that's what the buzz in Brisbane is all about.
Absolutely, and Rahul, Narendra Modi also using different arguments to urge global leaders to address the problem of black money, also saying that there is a strong connect between unaccounted black money and global terror.
Oh, absolutely. Finding a security dimension which exists on the ground, and that is the one reason. See, because there are huge corporate sensitivities around some of these accounts. The banking system is rather opaque, especially in countries like Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, where the entire economy thrives in keeping the nature of ownership secretive. Now, the Prime Minister is pushing to change that, and the one way in which a global consensus can be formed is by forging a link to terrorism, by making it seem as if this is a global threat, which it is, because a lot of the terror financing happens through these unaccounted for accounts, and that really then gives all countries a reason to go back to their corporates, to go back to the naysayers and say, well, we need to push ahead with this, because if we don't, then terrorism gets the funding that it does. And by doing this, we can cut down on funding available to terrorism, at least through official channels. Let it happen through Benami, let it happen through Hawala, but at least through official channels in known accounts, we should be able to clamp down. And that, I think, is very smartly positioning the black money issue, linking it with global terror, so that nobody really can then take an opposing viewpoint. And that, I think, is something which is very smart, which the Prime Minister has done. But in the midst of all of this, I think, Sini, and I want to reiterate this once more, that the biggest achievement over the past 24 odd hours has been the Prime Minister's success in getting the United States to come on board, acknowledging India's concerns on food security, and yet pushing through with the trade facilitation agreement. This is being stuck. India was being perceived as a global villain. There was a move afoot where several countries said, okay, let's leave India out of the ambit, let's move ahead with the countries that are willing to come on board. India was the only dissenting voice. So the Prime Minister hasn't compromised on domestic needs when it comes to food security, and yet has been able to earn plaudits from the United States and been able to convince them. And this really shows that by India sticking to its guns on the issue of food security in the G20, actually managed to pull this off. This is, in fact, a huge economic diplomacy victory, and kudos equally to Nirmala Sitharaman, the Minister of State for Finance, who's worked on the sidelines trying to make this happen. The Prime Minister, of course, as the head of state, as the face of the government, gets the maximum amount of credit, but the entire machinery has been working behind the scenes relentlessly to try and make this happen. And this is one of the biggest takeaways in global trade for the last several years, where you now will move, and not in, say, a year or 2 years from now, but the WTO says in a little...
And Rahul, you know, even as you speak there, the G20 summit has started. On our screens are pictures of US President Barack Obama. We also saw David Cameron a short while back, world leaders gathering there. That's we can also spot Prime Minister Narendra Modi sitting next to the Chinese president, I believe. Lots of world leaders here. Rahul, take us through what's the agenda of the summit, of the 9th G20 summit here in Australia?
Well, since the G20 organization currently faces an existential question mark, and that is around its ability to prove that it still is relevant. The G7, the G8 formulation was considered ineffective because the emerging markets were out of the G7, G8, which is why they formed the G20. And in 2008, 2009, at its peak, the G20 seemed the ultimate economic panacea, when countries were able to come together and agree on a global economic stimulus after the financial crisis in the United States. Those were hugely effective, very consequential G20 meetings. However, since then, as the threat of an economic collapse lapsed, the relevance of the G20 also didn't seem quite as significant as it did in 2008, 2009. And now what we're seeing is an attempt being made to try and increase global trade. Now, one of the things that was required for this was the trade facilitation agreement that we just spoke about, where the Prime Minister has landed a major success. But beyond that, the attempt is to try and push global trade up by about $2 trillion, which would be 2% of the global GDP. Now, the challenge over here at the G20 is to formulate a concrete action plan under Australia's presidency to be able to achieve that target. And that is what the delegates have been working on. That's what the Sherpas have been working on. We spoke to Suresh Prabhu last night, who's Modi's Sherpa. He says that they're quite confident that all these countries together will be able to come up with a concrete action plan which will help achieve that target.
All right, Rahul, we're going to keep coming back to you for more updates. A short break here. We'll be back with Rahul Kawal, who's getting us all the live updates as the G20 summit begins in Brisbane.